Hi everyone and welcome. We're out here in my yard because we're checking in on my outdoor worm bin. You might remember from a week ago that we were out here checking in on how the food situation was. We were prepared to feed, but what we ended up doing was leaving it as is because we found that there was a fair amount of food in there remaining from previous feedings. That previous feeding that I'm referring to is actually 3 weeks ago now. It was 3 weeks ago that I placed a whole cantaloupe in here, and when we checked in on it last week, it looked like the worms were making pretty good progress with it, but there was still a fair bit left. So as we get closer to the bottom here, we're already seeing the cantaloupes. So let me get the camera down here a little bit closer so we can see what we're doing. Okay, so it's more or less what I was expecting to find. Oh, maybe not. Most of this cantaloupe, when I flipped it over last week, was still pretty intact. But this feels like it's been depleted quite a bit. It's interesting to see how like huge chunks of it are missing. And there's still chunks of it on here, clearly, but you can tell that they're making some pretty decent progress on this cantaloupe. So we definitely got a good number of worms hanging out right beneath where the cantaloupe is. And I think the cantaloupe will sustain these guys for a little bit longer, not to mention the fact that the bin is full of leaves and everything. But I was looking to put this bin back up against the wall of the house because it's just been sitting out in the yard, mainly because I knew that there was going to be some rain coming and I wanted to allow some moisture to make its way into the bin. And I'm glad I left it out here for a while, because over the past few days we've had rain on a number of occasions, including today. There's more rain on the way for tomorrow too, but right now for the next couple hours there's a little break, so I figured I'd come out here to tend to this bin a little bit. So the rains that we've gotten over the past few days have been doing this bin some good, I think. The material has a really nice look to it in terms of the moisture level. Digging down a little bit, we've got some pretty good looking castings too. It's commingled with a variety of different stuff. Here's the stem of a pumpkin that was thrown in here. It's holding up pretty good actually. Well, maybe not. It feels like the inside of it might be softening up. Yeah, look at that. Oh, and you can see worms right down through the middle of it as well. It's interesting how worms like to burrow into the middle of things to eat them. So I'm sure that stem will do fine given time. So alright, so yeah, I don't want to go nuts here turning this bin upside down. I just want to take a quick peek into it, because before I put it back against the wall of the house where it's not as easy to get at it, it seemed like this was just a good opportunity to try to get a better look at how things are progressing in here. If you've been watching my channel, then you know that this bin is occupied by red wigglers and European night crawlers, combination of both types of composting worms. I don't know how to tell the difference between the two really. I mean, I would assume that the night crawlers are simply a larger worm, but I can't really pick them apart from each other. I think we're going to be okay here with these with these couple pieces of cantaloupe. I think we're going to be good here for a little while longer. Nevertheless, I'd like to add a little bit of food. So at this point I think it's fair to just kind of blend in this old food, these old cantaloupe bits, kind of mix them into the material. This one we'll kind of leave that larger chunk of what remains. We'll put that on top so we can get a good look at how it's progressing next time we check on this bin. But who knows, that could be weeks from now, and by that time it could be completely gone. But I think I'm going to just drop a little bit of food in here, and then we can put this thing back up against the house and get it out of the rain. I think it's gotten enough moisture, at least for a while. All right, let's get some food to drop in here. Okay, well, it looks like what they're getting is a bunch of additional cantaloupe, but in this case it's just the rinds. The last cantaloupe they got was actually a rotted whole cantaloupe, chopped up into a few pieces. So this is not quite as much, but similar feeding to what they got last time. Definitely not as much. So I'll just put this in progress cantaloupe right here on the top of it. And I've got a couple other things here. Here we have some potato skins. And strawberry. Really just the leaves of strawberry with just a little bit of the fruit stuck to it still. So pretty generous feeding. It's been a while since this bin got anything, so it seemed sensible to supplement the food. But the other thing that I was really after today, in addition to making sure that there's enough food to go in this bin for a while, is just to make sure I've got enough grit in here. Because the one thing that I think that might have been neglected in this bin is the addition of grit. Now, I naturally added grit when I built this bin originally, but I can't recall having added any grit since that time. So I just wanted to add a feeding with some grit just to make sure that the bin's not running low on grit. So the last thing I'm going to add here is I got a pretty good surplus of coffee grounds, and I'm going to just throw in a little bit here on top, and I think that should keep this bin pretty well fed for a little while longer, a couple weeks at least. So this way I could just put it back up against the house and not worry so much about it, and at least I can get it out of the yard. It's been sitting in the middle of the yard for a week now or more, so it's definitely time for this bin to go back where it belongs. But now I think it's good to go for a little while longer. All right, let's get this thing covered back up. Okay, we're down here in my wormery now, so the next thing to happen is to feed the downstairs worm bins. So I've got a number of things lined up here. Let me just turn the camera down a little bit. Here you can see a lot of normal stuff: potato peels, carrot peelings, banana peels. But now in this other bin right here, somewhat unusual stuff that you normally don't see going into worm bins. We went to a party not long ago celebrating my sister's birthday, and in preparation for that there was a whole bunch of limes that were squeezed out to create a lime juice mixer for the bar. So the residual of that is a whole bunch of squeezed out lemons and limes, and I've even got some orange peels in here. So it's mostly limes, a few lemons, a little bit of orange, and it's been frozen as well. So I was hoping to pepper some of this in with the food as well. So, you know, everybody knows that bananas go great in a worm bin, mango, carrots, all these things go great in a worm bin. Citrus, on the other hand, is typically, you know, not seen as an ideal food for worms. Mainly, I believe, because there's a certain amount of oil in the skins of citrus fruits, not to mention the acidity of the fruit. But this stuff was sitting in water for the longest time, just kind of soaking. Hopefully kind of reducing its acidity, and I'm just going to add it in with the feeding today, and hopefully it'll get broken down just like the rest of the food, which I'm sure it will. I'm not concerned. So let's get the worm bins out here and get to work. Alright, so we're going to begin with the VermiBag Mini, and I gotta say, the whole wormery smells so nice and lemony fresh from having those lemons and limes sitting out here for the past few minutes. I like it. Definitely like the scent. So we've had about a week pass since the last time we came in here and fed this bin, and at that time they received a number of kind of small food scraps, tiny chopped items, stuff that I believe is probably, hopefully, been for the most part depleted. So we're going to just take a little peek down into the feeding zone area, which is right down the middle here, to see how things are progressing. We I think it's expected to see a number of these older items. Months have gone by now since this corn cob was placed in here. Corn cobs, apples, some of these things do take time. So you know, while they're getting broken down by the microbes and the bacteria and stuff in the bin, getting it ready for the worms to be able to consume it. I like to add additional food to supplement what's in here already, just to give it a chance to start breaking down as well. So I think what we've normally found was 2 cobs of corn. I think here's the other one. Just interesting now that time is progressing, and especially in the case of this piece, it's really thin. It's really been worked down nicely, and it's vanishing. So it's probably just a matter of time before I could just like stick my finger through it, but it's not quite there yet. It's still a little bit firm. And here's some other bits and pieces, maybe a celery stalk or a cauliflower stem or something like that. I don't know what that is, but other than those slow composting items, the corn and the apple, I think the remainder of the food that was given to this bin recently looks like it's been for the most part depleted. So I gotta say, this bin is doing quite nicely. You start looking at this material here, and it's got a real nice look to it. Slightly different from what I'm used to. I'm used to the castings that are produced by red wiggler worms, so I'm still getting accustomed to what night crawlers do. Since they're a larger worm, they produce slightly larger castings. But for the most part, it's, you know, it's worm composting, it's vermicomposting, it's not that different. I think another feeding for this bin is certainly in order. Keep things moving along. So, grab a handful of stuff to throw in here. I believe I'm going to try placing some of the citrus stuff down here on the bottom. Hopefully it doesn't just end up sitting in here for months and months and going nowhere. I don't think that'll be the case. I think we're going to be just fine with it. Using this piece of orange here as an example, I think this orange is doing okay. You know, I mean, it's breaking down clearly. It's only been a couple weeks since it was added, so I think we're going to be just fine here. So let's start reloading some of this older food back down into the feeding zone here. I think as time progresses here in this bin, or this bag is a continuous flow through style system, so when it comes time to harvest, really you're going to be pulling the castings out of the bottom. So after a while, I think the whole concept of digging down and burrowing down into the material as I normally do with my bins is just going to have to stop. So I'm going to try to wean myself off of digging down deep in this bin anymore and just start getting into the mode of, you know, adding food to the top layer only, or to the top surface, and try to leave the lower levels alone. A little bit more food to go in here. I think we're going to add a couple banana peels. There's some mango. A couple more banana peels. If I'm not mistaken, this is the pit of a mango. So that'll be another slow composting item which we'll be able to track over time to see how it progresses. But I think this should be a pretty good size feeding for these guys. Let's top things off here with a little bit of grit. Actually, it's quite a bit of grit, but that's fine. I'm not going to worry about that. And we'll toss in some coffee. Alright, I think we're in pretty good shape here. We'll just take this this paper bedding material and put it back here on top, and let things get back to work over here. Okay, so that's the European night crawlers in the VermiBag Mini. Let's get this thing covered up and move on. Next up is my VermiBag Tote, which is also night crawlers. These are the African night crawlers. So this bin in recent feedings I've found to have a fair amount of leftovers. So I did add some food last time, but in maybe 2 feedings ago I actually skipped feeding this bin. But I'm kind of hoping that it's had a chance to get caught up to the most recent feedings so that we can at least add a little bit of additional food to this bin. So let's poke around a little bit down here to see how things are progressing in the feeding zone. Push things aside and see if we can zero in on some of the old food items that they were given previously. Most of this is bedding. Here we've already got sight of an old food item that was added weeks ago, an apple. And the other VermiBag had a couple corn cobs in it, so does this. It's still got some pretty good size to it, so it's going to take a little bit of time to break down, but it's making progress. Now this apple is really starting to look the way it should, the way an apple in a worm bin should look. Let's see what else we can unearth here. This is a piece of mango that was cut in half, and here's the seed. And in time they're going to just get crazy about the inside of that mango pit. They really love that inside, but it needs time to soften up so they can get at it. And here's the other corn cob. Also pretty good in size still. So other than that, I think we've got a couple other small items down in here. Another apple that's breaking down. So we've still got a fair amount of food in here, you know. So I mean, geez, here's a piece of citrus, another piece of orange. It's a pretty good amount of food, you know. So I'm really questioning whether I want to add much food to this. I definitely want to add something just to give whatever it is that I add a chance to start breaking down, so that at some point it too can be consumed by the worms. But I definitely don't have a lot of room in this bin, or this bag, because it is pretty much full of food. Here too you can see a tomato from previous feedings. Eventually it'll all get broken down. Just got to be patient. Alright, I'm just going to put a few items in here. I'm not going to go crazy adding a ton of food. I think what we added to the VermiBag Mini, to the European Nightcrawler bag, was realistic because of what we saw in there. But in here we got to keep it real too, so we just got to, you know, limit ourselves to what we put in here. I'm not going to add a lot. I'm just going to add a couple of these citrus items, a couple banana peels, and we'll try to get rid of some more of this coffee. Today I've actually got 2 of these containers to get rid of. It's part of the reason I'm sort of forcing the issue a bit here, because I just have way too much stuff piling up in the freezer. So whatever, I mean, if I really find that I'm running out of space, I can always throw stuff into that outdoor bin. I guess this can only help a little bit, right, is to try to break some of these apples up a bit. You know, I usually like to keep things full and allow nature to take its course in the breakdown process, but I think there's no harm in this case to try to help nature along a bit and break things up a bit, because I'd really like to see some progress in here. I think before we top it off, we're going to add some grit. Here again, a nice generous portion, and then we can start covering up. Kinds of stuff in here. Bedding. So I'm going to take these pieces of bedding that I scooped out earlier and keep them down here in the feeding zone. A little bit dry here on the edge as well. Not too dangerous. There's some good sized worms in here. Like I said, these are the African night crawlers, and that's their nature. They're a good sized worm. I just gotta get used to it, because I'm always taken aback, because I'm a red wiggler composter for the past few years, just getting accustomed to having night crawlers in my population. So sometimes it's a little bit of a surprise to see how big the worms are in my bins or in my bags. Okay, moving on. Alright, so here in my red wiggler bin, I don't know if it's going to show up on the camera, but there are a whole bunch of really tiny mites cruising around here on the edge of the container, on the cardboard. But I don't know. I'm not sure if it's really worth worrying about. I think it's a natural thing to have stuff in your worm bins other than worms. It's just that if, you know, some of those helper creatures in the bin start to outnumber the worms, you end up with sort of an infestation, then it might be time to react and make adjustments and try to correct things. But I think, you know, the presence of a couple little bugs here and there is not the end of the world, and it's almost to be expected in your worm bins. So it's a little bit noisy because the heater just turned on and the fan is blowing, so there's a lot of background noise, but still I can hear the sound of the worms right beneath the surface squirming away. The moisture level here is pretty nice. I think this bin, over the past few weeks, we've noticed that it's been a little bit more damp than it needs to be, but I'm not worried about it. I think it's fine. I think the worms actually favor it when it's a little bit damp like that. So let's see, the last feeding in this bin was a lot of small kind of carrot peels and a lot of small stuff. There was some large stuff here too. This might be like the stem of a head of cauliflower. Here we have a peach pit, which we keep bumping into, which hopefully in time will break down as well, but it's probably something that we can expect to see take a long time to break down. So you can see some of the food scraps from the previous feeding are still scattered throughout here, but it does appear like they're making some pretty good progress. Definitely seeing leftovers. And I'm also kind of experiencing a little bit of an odor. I can smell a little bit of a funkiness, which I did make reference to last time I was in this bin. But it seems like it's maybe not quite as pungent this time. Hopefully it's on its way out. That could just really be the that could just be the side effect of having maybe a little bit more food in the bin than is absolutely necessary. But you know, if you're a regular on my channel, you know that I like to always feed generously. And it's not so much about wanting to or liking to. It just seems like the supply of kitchen scraps in the freezer keeps growing and growing, and I just need to get rid of it. Okay, so I think we've got a pretty good setup over here. I'm still seeing a fair amount of like bedding materials down in here. We did supplement bedding recently, so I'm not going to worry about bedding either. I think we're going to just drop in the food and move on. After this, we've only got one other bin to be taken care of. So let's just drop these old pieces that we encountered on our way down, back down into the feeding zone. Yeah, okay. Once again, I'm going to go with adding a little bit of citrus. Some of this is really frozen together solid. No big deal. We'll see how that progresses. Here we've got some carrot peels, some potato peels, some cabbage leaves. Even have a piece of bread here. And that reminds me, I've got a half a loaf of bread upstairs that's getting moldy, and I was going to include that in this feeding today, but I think I've got plenty of regular veggies and kitchen scraps and fruits and stuff for today. So maybe next time we'll get around to adding some bread to the feeding. Okay, this is actually a whole potato. I wonder how that's going to fare. Let's just throw it in there and see what happens. Maybe by next week it'll soften up a little bit and I could mush it and crumble it, but it is frozen right now, so there's not much I could do. Alright, very nice. Not sure what it is, you know. I'm always accustomed to coming into my worm bins and finding that they've pretty much knocked out everything I've given them, except in the recent feedings, it just feels like I've been needing to hold back and not feed as much as I normally would, because things are going a little bit slower down in these bins than normally. And I'm just going to attest that to the fact that it's cooler. It's the winter months right now. It's February, so my basement's not really heated, so it generally maintains a temperature of about 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which is you know, still comfortable to be able to walk down here and do laundry and stuff like that. But sometimes I just wonder if it might be having an effect on the worms and kind of causing them to slow down a little bit. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. Feeding zone is where you would expect to find all the worms, but I'm definitely seeing a lot of worms hanging out on the edges. It's a nice densely populated worm bin. Looking pretty good here. Hopefully we can squeeze the last of the food that I've got remaining into the last bin that we need to feed. So let's cover up here and get that last bin up. Okay. I think just in comparison between the two red wiggler bins, we have noted that this bin was a little bit drier than the other one. So I think that's normal to find it that way. Now what's going on here? This looks like some sort of like a little caterpillar or some sort of an insect larvae. I don't know what the heck this little guy is doing in here. I mean, I'm not familiar enough with insects to know what it is, but you know, in my mind, I think insects are sometimes welcomed, but you know, I don't want to have like a whole colony of something other than worms living in here. If there's a few helper bugs in here once in a while, that's fine, but I just decided to squash that little guy and get rid of him. Alright, things are looking pretty good in here. I might have spoken early because the moisture level is just fine down here. I mean, maybe not quite as damp as the other bin that we just fed, but certainly nothing to worry about here. This apple's making some pretty good progress. But I might do the same with these items as well, as kind of help them along and crack them up a little bit if I can. Maybe that'll help with the composting process a bit. I don't really see any of the food scraps from the previous feeding. This bin got the same sort of stuff as the other bins with the shredded carrot and, you know, stuff like that, but I don't see any signs of that in this bin. Makes me wonder if this bin might be just a little bit more active than the one that we just fed. We've definitely got tons and tons of worms down here in the feeding zone, right beneath the feeding zone. So let me just see if I can move some of these little guys aside. I always kind of feel like I don't want to... Let's put them over here so we can get to that old food. Get it back into the feeding zone. Just feel a little bit bad putting, you know, frozen food on top of worms sometimes. I know they can squirm away and it's not going to harm them or anything. But it also gives me a chance to really poke around and see how the worms are doing. Now here too, I feel like I'm maybe not seeing quite as much bedding as I saw in the other bin. Just interesting, because I had this weird sense that that other bin was more active, but who knows, maybe this is the most active of the bins that I have. It's hard to say. You know, I'm not going to worry too much about it, because if you do look around, there are pieces of bedding here and there. Maybe next go around, maybe I'll beef up the bedding supply next time. For now, I think we'll just stick to adding food. Here's another mango seed. It's always a popular item. There's always worms hanging out all around one of these. Whether it's been cracked in half yet and if they can access the inside or not. They always seem very interested in it. And I believe it was last week that I was even trying to crack one of these seeds using my fingers. Might have been this seed. It's really not getting there quite yet. It's interesting though, you could see some of the fibrous material. And you know, I guess here this sort of does allow you to poke your finger in at this point and see what's inside. Whatever, I'm going to touch it, see what's inside. Alright, so it doesn't seem like the worms have made their way in yet. Maybe I just provided them an access point by cracking it open. So I think that seed right there in the middle is what they're really after. That's what they really like. So once one of these things opens up, it's always right inside of the pit is where you find all the worms. So alright, let's get some food in here and then we're done for the day. I think on this one, citrus might not be an option because I don't know if I can dislodge any more of this. Maybe a couple pieces, but for the most part it's like a solid brick of ice. This must have been the bottom of the bag where all the moisture collected, and it's kind of a nice block at this point. So let me see if I could chip one or two more pieces off of this, but some of this might just need to go back into the freezer at this point. God, I love that smell. It's so nice. Even though for the most part it's frozen, it's got this really awesome citrusy lemon fresh smell. Alright, so here again, banana peels, carrot peelings, hunks of cabbage. Let's get some of these old food items right back down in here as well. We got the most of it, but I really don't have any place to put this, the remainder of this food, so you know what, I'm just going to pour it in and hope for the best. It does seem like this bin is making good progress on the food that it receives, so hopefully we're not overloading it. I'm just going to drop in everything I've got remaining. It's mostly banana peels too, so you would think that that's the sort of popular item that the worms are going to plow right through in no time. So hopefully this is not a mistake. Hopefully a nice generous feeding like this is only going to be good for the bin, not detrimental. But just to play it safe, we're going to make sure that the food is provided with an ample supply of grit so that the worms have a good way of breaking it down. Gotta watch that eggshell dust. Okay, what else? I think we're almost there. The only thing remaining now is whatever's left of the coffee. Alright. I believe it's mission accomplished. So, you know, I guess you can tell my mission is not so much making sure that the worms have food, because they definitely got food whether I come down here or not. The real mission is to clear out space in my freezer. So, yeah, you know, I mean, between kitchen scraps piling up here on its own, but then also my mom providing input into the feedings, I always seem to have an ample supply of kitchen scraps to give the worms. So I don't think my worm colony is going to go hungry anytime soon. This is a fun bin to play in. It's always cool to see large quantities of worms. It's also really nice to see that the feeding you gave them the previous go around has been depleted. So yeah, this is definitely a good way to wrap up today's feeding. A bin with good success like this one. So alright, I'm just going to go ahead and pack things up here, and that's kind of boring, so I won't bother you with that. Let me just part by saying thank you. Thank you for sticking around and watching my video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please remember to give it a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And also consider becoming a subscriber to the channel. That's always really appreciated as well. Alright everyone, take care. Hopefully we'll see you back here next time. And thank you for watching. Bye now.